Hi, you guys, and welcome back to the podcast.
We are the KarWells.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are, as you know, Airbnb interior designers and investors. All right, everyone. Well, welcome back to Catch Up with the KarWells. Today is another episode with just Emily and I, which honestly, we've been doing more of these episodes, and I love them.
Me too.
I know, it's like two best friends just hanging out. Okay, so today our topic of conversation, and it's been a common one that Emily and I have talked about recently, is starting one venture that leads to another venture, or having to start one venture that may eventually lead to another venture if you can't get to venture number 2 day one. And we've had this trend, I guess you could say, where this scenario happened multiple times so far in the last 4 years. And when we look at each other's 10-year plans, we can see that that's probably going to happen again several more times. So, being an entrepreneur is not linear by any stretch of the imagination, and we want to keep it real around what that looks like behind the scenes for us, so that maybe you can find some relatability in this and not feel so alone. So I guess let's kind of kick it off with...
Do you want to kick it off with just an update on your regulation thing, and that can be our horror story for today?
Oh yeah, let's do that. All right, so as you guys know, we start every episode with a horror story, and of course we've just got a plethora of them. Okay, so I will talk about the horror stories that I'm going through right now with regulation changes. So Michigan, as a state, had a bill at the state level that was suggesting or proposing a short-term rental regulation that would blanket the regulation across the state. So it would take the power away from the townships and the cities, and it would give the power to the state, and there would be one regulation that governed all short-term rentals. And that has been sitting in the state for a year and a half, and it's been presented, I think, 4 times over the last, I don't know how many years. Well, anyway, that regulation got squashed in December, and so all of the townships and cities that were waiting to develop regulation or to see if they would be able to develop regulation, now are starting to make moves to develop regulation, right? Because it wouldn't make sense for them to develop it and then have to take it right down if the state was going to change that regulation. They didn't want to spend money on enforcing it. So now that they know that they've got the power, 50% of my portfolio, so we have 4 properties here in Michigan, 2 out of the 4 are in townships that are currently developing a new regulation for short-term rentals. And so this is a little bit less of a nightmare scenario than it is just a reality of this industry. And so last night I was sitting in a city meeting for the property that currently is our moneymaker because it's been on the market the longest, really. That's about the only reason. But and you could tell that all 4 of the zoning boards, so we've met with the city board members, and then we've met with the zoning board members now. And some of those people overlap on both, which seems like a conflict of interest, but aside the point.
Small town problems.
Small town problems. They are the ones that are against short-term rentals, and they're pretty adamant about being anti-short-term rental. But last night we went to that city meeting, and there was probably 60 people that showed up to a city meeting that typically has no one, right? Like no one shows up to these meetings. And I would say 95% of people in that room were pro short-term rental. And so the conversation was good. But with every single person that said something good, the zoning department had some sort of a rebuttal on why it was bad. So it was like us telling the city why these are great. And it wasn't just short-term rental hosts that showed up. It was like business owners and old B&B owners who lived on site and actually made breakfast back in the day.
That's incredible that business owners showed up. That's I feel like that sends a huge message.
Yeah, I mean, the restaurants, specifically the lady who owns the gift shop, how is she staying in business if we don't have short-term rentals? Because there's not a hotel in Lilly Township.
Mm-hmm. That's what I say about Alpena, too, because there's 7 gift shops up here.
Yeah. So it's just, it's one of those things that I think, from my perspective, regulation is good. we need regulation, and I understand why cities are going through it, but it definitely ups the anxiety level for a period of time, whether or not you're going to get to keep your properties. So it's part of it. And I know a lot of hosts will be like, oh, enter in markets where regulation is already developed. And although that may bring a little bit more security, I mean, governments can always change regulation. So, um, don't feel like you're safe, I guess, in an area that has regulation already. And, don't feel safer if your place doesn't have regulation. It just, you never know. It's the luck of the draw. But Michigan right now is a little heated in quite a few counties.
Yeah, and I think some people would be shocked to hear that we might be pushing for some sort of regulation in the areas that we're in. But in my opinion, like it brings a little bit more security if they at least know what short-term rentals are and like understand that there needs to be some sort of regulation. And then it makes it so like hosts who maybe weren't going to put an effort into their property anyways are not going to go through the process of regulating their property. And so that just
Right,
makes it so like a bad host doesn't even get into it and doesn't ruin the reputation for anybody else.
right. Well, and this is like kind of a side note, kind of unrelated to regulation, but kind of, I guess, could have been a nightmare scenario. We get out of the meeting last night, and the meeting started at 7:30, and it didn't end until 9:30. And of course, the city that this is happening in is an hour and 15 minutes from where we live full time, so it's going to be a long drive home. And it's like in this just like masonry building. So it just is like a bunker inside of the city hall. And so I have zero cell phone service in it. Like my phone literally reads SOS. Um, and I get out of the meeting and I get a bunch of notifications from the guests who are staying in the property in that city. So I'm typically not around. And ironically, our cleaning team that lives 2 doors down is on vacation right now. Like they had this small window where they were like, we're going to go to Grand Rapids, we're doing a staycation, we're getting a hotel, yada yada, but we're not going to be on site for 24 hours. And we're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like we have guests, no big deal. Well, the guests that were in Bitely last night tripped the breaker and couldn't figure out how to fix the breaker. Well, they could figure out how to fix the breaker, but the pump needed reset because when the breaker tripped, it was to the pump, which gives the whole house water. And so they didn't have water, and they were like getting kind of panicky immediately because they were like, 2 of the people in our party really have to use the bathroom, and we can't use the bathroom right now. And I was like, oh my gosh. But literally from the time that they sent the message, which ironically was like a few minutes before we got out of the meeting, to when we showed up to the house and fixed the issue, it was like under 10 minutes.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice.
It was so lucky. And like how we fixed it, unless I was on site, I wouldn't have been able to like talk them through it because I had never fixed the pump before. So
Well, next time, now you know.
I know. I was like, wow, this is like incredible timing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that really, really is. Sorry, my cat keeps jumping into my mic and everything. So if you guys hear muffling in the background, it's because my cat won't leave me alone. Gone for a couple days, and she's just like attached to me since I walked in the door.
Well, at least she's not sprayed by a skunk like my dog.
Yeah, very, very happy about that. And oh my gosh, if Zero got sprayed by a skunk, I would be so mad. I'd be freaking
Yeah.
out.
I mean, look, it's like, you get to a new property. Luna just has to do all the exploring the second we purchase a new property, and she found where the skunks hang out day one.
Yeah,
Like,
I haven't seen any skunks up here. We do have a fox, and I'm like, Zero's pretty timid and like not aggressive, and so if he got into it with this fox, he would just get his shit rocked. And so I'm like, Zero, leave the fox alone. It's smaller than you, but it's definitely gonna take you down. Like, there's just no way.
yeah, there's no doubt. Fox are sassy.
They are. It's very cute, but yes, he lives in our backyard.
These animals keeping us on our toes.
Living in the middle of nowhere, that's what happens.
So true. Okay, so let's kind of transition into talking about the topic that we want to cover today, which really, I mean, I don't even know how to like concisely say exactly what we're trying to talk about other than trust the process, basically.
Yeah, and it's like I could say it so many ways, but it doesn't even like really encompass it. Like be intentional with what you're building or build a business to build a business, but like that kind of sounds weird. So we'll just
Yeah.
talk about the process and then maybe it'll make sense at the end.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's one of those things that, as we've grown in this space over the last 4 years, like, I don't know how necessarily intentional some of these things were, or looking back on them, some of these things were like, oh, yeah, that really worked out. And how do I apply that going forward as well? So it's like partially lesson, partially intentionality. But I feel like, now being 4 years into this, personally, and you can confirm or deny on your end as well, I'm starting to feel very, very settled as identifying as an entrepreneur. Where, at first I was like, okay, how long are we going to be able to keep this wheel turning? Are we going to have to go back to our 9 to 5s? What is this going to look like long term? Worst case scenario, if all of it collapses, I can always go back to corporate America. And now I feel like I'm in this mindset where I'm like, no, it wouldn't matter what the world did or what happened to this business. I've got enough of a skill set, entrepreneurial skill set, to be able to apply it in a way that I would be able to pivot. And so now whenever I'm looking at things, I'm like, okay, being way more intentional about where I'm spending my time and how this is going to have longevity. Like, I feel like I'm truly in the game now and playing it instead of like, okay, does this space want me? Do I belong here? Is this going to last forever? I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I couldn't even tell you exactly when it happened, but at some point my mind shifted from that mindset of like, oh, if this falls apart, I'll just have to go back and get a regular job, like a 9 to 5. I'll use my degree maybe finally. And then my mindset shifted to where it wasn't so much like I don't know if I'll ever feel like super comfortable because like there's things that are always shifting, but my mindset just switched back to like that's not happening. Like no matter what, I'm not doing that because I love being like my own boss. I love building things. So like if this fell apart for whatever reason, I know that I could go build something else on my own instead of having to go back. And so I just shifted into like this mindset of no matter what, that's just not an option for me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of the skills, I mean, regardless of what you're doing, and I'm sure if you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur, you understand that the skill sets that you develop are transferable across any business, right? And so there's just this like baseline of understanding how, um, how supply and demand works, how business works, how marketing works, how all of these like little hats that you have to wear as the owner of a business would translate into any other industry. And so it's like, I know you and I will talk about like businesses that are completely not related to short-term rentals that we're like, we'll get into conversations about how we would run it differently just based on the skill set that we have now. And so, yeah, I think that shift in mindset just comes from a place of like, it wouldn't ever make sense for us to go back into corporate America.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think that mindset shift too. Like I s- I spent a lot of time looking at people in like corporate America jobs and being like, okay, if I did that job, I would do it like this. If I did this job, I would do it like this. And now instead, I look at the owner of a company and I'm like, okay, how would I run that business differently? How would I do this? So I don't even like look at the jobs that maybe I would go into. Say back then I did go back to corporate America. I'm not even looking at those jobs anymore because I just like don't want my mentality to go back to that.
yeah, definitely. Well, and I think too, I mean, we've talked, this is definitely exactly applicable when we look at our journey in particular, both with what we've gone through already and what we will go through in the future. We don't always, you and I don't always overly vocalize the 10-year plan, right? Or the 20-year plan.
Yeah.
And because it's, there's enough chaos in the day to day and we talk about those things most often. But for example, and we have talked about this very publicly several times, KarWells Design was never created to be a solid, well built out, well rounded business. And I look back on that era, and we were pretty intentional with that one on how that was going to be a building block to a larger goal. And so if you guys have heard this story, here it is again. But it truly was oh, I just watched Ethan in the background just smash his funny bone.
Oh, no.
Anyway, back on subject. How KarWells Design was truly a pivot to me wanting to invest in short-term rentals and wear the investor hat, and then the economy came collapsing, and as opposed to crawling back to corporate America, which I still had to do, we decided to open up a business to save an original business. And I think also, even though it was a pivot to really first and foremost pay for the properties that I had signed leases on just in case they didn't make rent, and I knew that I was going to need more income than just my 9 to 5 that I was inevitably having to stay at longer than I wanted to. You and I had several conversations about how, outside of it bringing in income for us, it was going to put us in the right room with investors. And it was going to teach us a thing or two about how to be a better investor down the road, because both you and I knew that that was overall the goal that we wanted to accomplish. And so I think that's interesting because it's like, okay, you and I built a sloppy interior design business.
So sloppy. I wish you guys could see the invoices that we used. Like, a pretty standard invoice, but like so sloppy looking that now I'm like, why did, like, we didn't even use like a system for it at that point in time. We were just like making them in Word or Google or whatever else, making our invoices in that. It was very sloppy. We didn't pay for any systems on the back end. We were just like throwing things together on our own.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, like we never really talked about how to streamline it because we knew that it was temporary. And it was a stepping stone to get us closer to the overall goal of getting back to investing in our own properties and designing for ourselves. And so I think that, having to build a tiny side hustle or a business that definitely puts you closer to your overall goal never necessarily is a bad thing.
Yeah.
You just have to maybe look at not only the income that it's bringing you in, but all of these other intangibles that are definitely playing a role in whether you're going to be successful down the road.
Yeah. I think looking back now too, like, we got really comfortable in that job, even though it was like kind of sloppy the way that we did it. And we did start to build some systems, right? Like, we had to make it so we could actually just do the job efficiently. And we got comfortable with the system that we had going. And I think joining Superhost Labs at that time, even though it didn't last very long for us, was something we desperately needed because it made us stop this thing that we weren't planning on being long term anyways. But I think we would have continued on doing that because we got so comfortable in it. So like, the
Yeah.
intention was never for it to be a long term business, but we were like, oh, this is making us some money. We're able to do it and like still kind of get our own portfolio started. And so we got really comfortable in it instead of like continuing on to our goals. So joining Superhost Labs and having to completely rebrand was probably one of the most beneficial things that came from joining them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, you and I had a conversation when we talked about joining Superhost Labs again, because at that point in time when we joined Superhost Labs, like, I had started investing again in my own properties, and KarWells design was remote at that point. But you and I knew before Superhost Labs even reached out to us that we were at a point where we were definitely getting ready to collapse the design side of things because we weren't, it wasn't bringing us joy anymore. We didn't need the income nearly as bad as we did originally. And we had, really understood design for short-term rentals intimately, but we didn't understand everything outside of design as intimately. And so you and I were like, look, I don't know if Superhost Labs is the thing that, is going to be our forever place. But there is so much advantage to joining because it's going to put us again in the right room with people who understand this industry even more intimately than we do. We're going to get paid while we're there. So it's like getting paid for going to real estate college. And, we just have to internally be very cognizant of whether this is still serving us or whether we've learned everything that we need to learn here or, and so again, it was a move that just like wasn't exclusively about money. It was about education and getting us even closer to being even better investors for ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely was a beneficial period of time, I think, for our future journey for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think too, I've been crystal clear on like wanting this portfolio of properties since 2019,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like this, like now having 4 properties here in Michigan and you having a property in Michigan and us having some properties in Texas, like that vision was there in 2019, right? Was there 4 years ago. Like we knew what that looked like 4 years ago. Um, and in the interim, we were like, okay, but how do we get there? We don't know. And so I think that, you know, if we would have been solely focused on that, I think we would have missed a lot of like educational and networking opportunities along the way if we weren't willing to go on these little tangents for a while in the interim while we were kind of waiting for our bank accounts to fill up, waiting for properties to get purchased and for the wheel to start turning on some of these short-term rentals. But also, even beyond that, for you in particular, I mean, I feel like, you know, for me, I'm like, okay, the goal really was short-term rentals. Like I wanted this portfolio of short-term rentals and I'm still unclear on what my life looks like beyond that, right? Because that really was kind of the top tier goal. But you've got a goal even beyond that, you know, you're kind of working on behind the scenes. So why don't you talk about that and what that could look like down the road?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, the two things that I wanted was one, to be working in some sort of social media, and two, to own my own clothing company. And so when I started in Airbnb, I was like, oh, I'll get to the clothing stuff eventually. And then over the past 2 years, I've just been like heads down in the Airbnb space. Well, now that we've built something that's kind of sustainable at this point, and I know what I'm doing with getting these properties up and running, it kind of opens up the conversation now again to build another business because I feel comfortable building a business now because I've done it already. So my plan is to always be in the Airbnb space because I'll always have investment properties. But my ultimate goal is to build a t-shirt company that is not going to be passive, even remotely, because I'll be designing and have hopefully a retail store and have social media and stuff for that as well. But that was my original goal when I went to college and all of these things. And it's never gone away. My passion for being in the fashion industry has never gone away. And I've been able to like keep my creative juices flowing in Airbnb and then learn a bunch about building an entire business. But I'm not going to, now that I know all of this stuff and now that I maybe have a little bit more financial freedom to do it, it's more of a reality for me to actually build that business now.
Right. Right. I mean, you know, when you think about different businesses, every business that you look into has a different barrier of entry,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is this like financial burden that varies depending on what business it is to get started. And so when we look back on Carwell Design and Superhost Labs in particular, that cost us $0 to get started on both fronts, right? Like we already had the skill set to design for other people. We already had, you know, computers that we could design things in. And so it was a very low cost of entry, but we knew it was going to like play out for our benefit down the road. And then of course, properties have a certain barrier of entry. You know, you're looking at anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 to get into it. But clothing could be even more than that,
Oh,
right?
it's a lot. There's
Yeah.
a whole lot, and you take on a lot of liability with like your inventory because you always have this like debt of inventory until you sell out. And so the business model that I'm looking at now is different than I probably would have looked at before I was running a business anyways. The way I'm approaching things, like when I was in college, I was like, I'm going to do it all myself. I'm going to buy my own printing machine and I'm going to do it all in-house. And now that I run a business, delegation is so much more important to me now. And so the idea of hiring out somebody doesn't feel as wrong to me as for whatever reason it felt like I needed to do it all myself at the beginning. And now that I've done this, I don't feel like I need to do it all myself anymore. And so there are portions of my business, my eventual business, that I will hire out that I might not have done if I hadn't done this already.
Right, right. And it's like, you know, as we've been working the last 4 years and we've gone down these other tangents, right? And because you and I had a very candid conversation about when we started this, like, and me knowing that that was your overall goal, I was like, Emily, you're going to have to put that on pause for several years to build this. Are you okay with that? Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is that something that you're willing to do? And I remember like at the time feeling kind of guilty for having to have that conversation. But now looking back, I'm like, what is 4 years? You
Yeah.
know, like I feel like now that we feel more settled in this entrepreneurial role and we're starting to think about things in like 5 year and 10 year terms instead of like 15 minutes in front of us, 1 week in front of us, 2 months in front of us, it allows us to feel comfortable taking these like ventures that maybe have to fill time in between a larger goal that will help us get to that goal, but it doesn't feel as like crazy to be like, okay, that's not a today thing, that's a 2025 thing, that's a 2030 thing. Because now we're comfortable here. We're like, okay, yes, these businesses can build up pretty quickly. We're not in this insane rush. I don't feel as like anxious to just be like, oh my gosh, we have to accomplish this tomorrow, or I'm never going to accomplish it. It feels like, okay, we've got time, we've got patience, we understand it a little more, we've got our bearings. Like, it's not insane to think that we might go down another side venture for a period of time and bring it back. But
Yeah. Yeah. Because honestly, like I might be thinking about this clothing company now, but in reality, I have a property to get up and running. I want at least two properties up and running before I get there. And like, I'm going to let this property run for a year just because I have other things going on that are going to be taking up my time while this property is running. And I want to figure out the kinks before I get another one going. So in reality, it's 2025, 2026 before I even actually get into the clothing stuff. But I'm prepping now because I understand the work that it's going to be to build that. So I'm like organizing my thoughts, understanding what the cost is to get it up and running today so that in 2026 I can hit the ground running and understand what I need to do that.
yeah. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said as well about, we've had several conversations in our recent past about going deep instead of wide. And I think that there is a ton of truth behind that. I think that that is incredibly valuable advice because at the end of the day, we've seen time and time again that if you go deep instead of wide, that's really where the big money is. But at the beginning of this entrepreneurial journey, you almost have to go wide for a while before you go deep because unless you're just you've got the money to start the thing that you want to do forever day one, which I don't know anyone who's started that way. Like, I've never met anyone with that amount of clarity and cash at the beginning. You have to, like, run around and taste a lot of things and put yourself in different rooms and put yourself in uncomfortable scenarios. And so I feel like, when we were sitting at the table the other day with a bunch of industry leaders and we were talking about, if all of us would stick to doing this one thing for the next 5 years, all of us would be 7-figure earners. You and I were in the room when we had that conversation around Superhost Labs as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, if we stuck with Superhost Labs for the next 5 years, we'd all be 7-figure earners. And I think that that's absolutely true, right? If you really just dive deep on one thing for 5 years, you probably will be a 7-figure earner, assuming your business model is worth a shit. But at the you just might not know at the beginning exactly where you need to be spending your time, or you might not have the cash to start the thing that you want to go deep on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, although true that if you go deep instead of wide, that's really where the money is, I haven't felt this insane pressure like I need to go deep right away because I just don't know where that depth is going to bring me the most joy, right? And for you, you're like, I know where it is, but I do not have the cash to align with that thing that I want to go deep on yet.
Yeah. I also think that there's something to be said about going wide with like truly understanding how your business runs, because I think at the beginning, if you don't understand how every step of your process works, you're not a good business owner because you're not going to be hiring the right people because you don't actually know what you need. So I think truly understanding your business doesn't necessarily mean you have to work in that position at the very beginning, but I think you need to understand every single position that's in your business to have a successful one. And I think the businesses that don't work out are the people who are like, oh, I'm just going to push this off to somebody else and I'm never going to understand what that looks like, because then you have like, what if that person up and leaves and you have to hire somebody else and you don't know what you're looking for because you've been pushing off this portion of your business forever. So I think going wide at the beginning and like dabbling in the different aspects of your industry or your business is really important to the success of it, even if you are not planning on, that's not your genius zone or whatever, and you're not going to be working in that aspect of it forever. I think that that's a really important thing that a lot of people try to skip.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, like when you become a business owner, I think if you are the type of person who wants to be entrepreneurial and wants to start your own business, it comes with a certain level of ego, right? That you feel like you are worthy of being a business owner, that you are capable, that you are better than your competition. But with that ego, I think it's very easy to get in a mindset that you feel like maybe some tasks in your business that you want to build, you are above.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That this is work that you shouldn't be spending time on, because you hear all of these entrepreneurs who are 10 years, 15 years into their journey, and they're like, you can't be working in the business, you have to be working on the business. And although that's true, that's not at the beginning.
Mm-mm.
Like, you have to lay this thing brick by brick, and a lot of times that means spending months or years doing the work that you don't want to do long term. And you are the person who has to do it, because it's not always feasible to outsource it, or it's not always smart to outsource it because you don't intimately understand it yet. And so I've caught myself a few times, like in different portions of our business, being like, why am I doing this? Like I know that it sucks the joy out of me. Like, this is not my genius zone. Like, I don't want to have to be spending time doing these nitty gritty details, having kind of an ego about it, being like, wow, like I need to figure out how to outsource this as quickly as possible. And in reality, every single time I look back on those things, I'm like I wouldn't know how to outsource it unless I intimately understood it. I wouldn't know how to describe how to do this to someone unless I understood it. And I wouldn't know if they were doing a good job or a bad job if I hadn't done it myself first.
Yeah, I was going to relate that directly back to short-term rentals, because like this is a way that your short-term rental business is taking away the passive aspect, but this is something that you recommend and that I recommend to people all the time, is like cleaning your property. If you don't clean your property at least a few times at the beginning, you have no idea how to train your cleaner to clean the property up to your standard or to what your guest is going to need. You have no idea. So if you're just hiring out a cleaner, a lot of people are like, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going through cleaners all the time." Well, it's because possibly at least a portion of it is because they're not trained, because you don't know what you're looking for in a cleaner, because you haven't cleaned your property before. So I think that they're like, people might feel like they're above cleaning their property, or they might be like, okay, well, I just want to push that thing off because I want to make it as passive as possible and I don't have time to go to the property and clean it beforehand. But like, I think that that's a super important thing to do at the very beginning, to make sure you intimately understand what needs to be done in your property.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it also just, plays into how over the last 4 years, I feel like you and I have done a really great job of building out this solid foundation. Like, I feel like even though we've gone wide in the sense that we haven't, built something out that's like, okay, this is where we want to land. This is who we are in the space. This is the corner we're going to take up. I think we're a lot closer than we were before. But at the same time, we've gotten such an intimate education on short-term rentals as a whole. And so as we are deciding where we really want to plant our roots, I'm starting to feel like there is so much clarity around what that looks like, because we've been exposed to so much, and we've been so intentional about having exposure to all these different strategies, all these different techniques, all these different markets. And so for you and I, it's just like, okay, like I would have hated to have built that solid foundation without having exposure to all of those things, because what's the point in going deep and then finding out 4 years down the road that the thing that you've been heads down on actually isn't the thing that would have created you the most wealth or brought you the most joy.
Yeah, I think that that is the joy part is an interesting thing to say, because I think when people say work on the business, not in the business, we're a little unique in that we love working in the business because we picked something that we love a lot to do. And so I think that like it says something about actually loving what you do and like caring about it, because don't get me wrong, short-term rentals are profitable and we love the income that comes from our job, and it is sustainable for us, but we truly love what we're doing. And so all of these like things that we're learning along the way, or like the little tasks that maybe we're not going to be doing a few years from now, but that we're doing right now, we actually love doing them. And so I mean, it's really cheesy to say love what you do, but that's exactly why I feel like that we've been able to grow a successful business, is because we actually love it. So when we, on the times that we do have to work in the business instead of on the business, we're not miserable while we're doing it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I remember, I mean, when you and I were internally like very clear that we wanted to collapse Carwell Design, I had two very vivid conversations with two separate people where they were just like floored that we were collapsing it because we had so much momentum, right?
Mm.
Like we had so many clients that were reaching out to us. We were doing, designs all over the US. We had started being flown to some of these properties. Like the properties kept getting bigger, the prices kept going up. But internally, you and I both were very clear that we were not enjoying ourselves, right? Like we were not passionate about building the business any more sustainable than we had already done it. We were very adamant that we did not want to bring on necessarily a full-time person or start training other people. We knew what it looked like. Like we were going to have to let go of the design side of things if we wanted to scale it because we would need to hire designers so that we could grow the design firm. And there was so much about it, although it was starting to become profitable, that you and I were like, it doesn't bring us any joy. Like what, we just, one, it's not passive at all. It has no passive component, no compounding component, no like all working income, 100%. And it was like, not aligned 100%. And so I think, even though it's something that we built for like 2 years straight, poured our hearts and souls into 2 years straight, having that clarity that you and I were always aligned on being like, look, this is a stepping stone in a much larger game that we are settling ourselves into for the next 30 years because we love the game, not this design business specifically. It was very easy for you and I to be like very confident in that decision and be like, no, it's done. We're collapsing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. When it came to the design thing, though, I think like we said this all the time. The part that we liked was such a small portion, and like the busy work, crappy part was such a big portion that like was kind of hard to outsource completely. And so we were always going to be doing that big portion that we didn't like. And so I think that looking into the future, we were like, okay, we eventually have to outsource some stuff, but there's some things we can't, and a lot of it is the stuff that we don't like. And so that it didn't make sense to like continue to just be unhappy doing a little bit of what we like and a lot of what we don't like.
That was a lot of what we didn't like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything post ordering all the furniture we didn't like.
Gosh, it's just the worst. I mean, even now, like with my own properties, I'm like, it's terrified to open the boxes because I don't want to return stuff.
It's so true. I've got 2 boxes in here that I don't want to return, and I'm like, ugh.
It's so annoying.
Okay.
I don't even like returning clothes. Like I'll keep clothes forever because I don't like going to the store and returning them, or like even mailing them back and returning them. It's just every aspect of my life, I'm not a return girl.
Yeah, I'm like, why hasn't someone this is like a tangent that I wasn't anticipating going on, but if somebody would create something for returns like Instacart or something where they like literally drop it off at your door so you don't have to leave your house, if someone would pick up things from my door, which maybe that's already a thing for
FedEx does that, but I don't think that they always do it for everything. Because I've done that before. I've like FedEx picked up stuff before. Kind of illegal, but when Michigan got rid of like jewels or whatever, I had a friend who was like really into them, and Texas still had them, so she had me buy her a bunch and mail them to her. And I was like, I'm not like going out of my way to do this for you. And she was like, just FedEx pick it up at your house. And I was like, okay. And they did.
Yeah, that's what I need in my life. Absolutely need in my life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess bringing it full circle. I mean, I think too, like the fact that I remember when we first got into entrepreneurship, and I had just been consuming a lot of content from other entrepreneurs, not short-term rental specific by any stretch of the imagination. And a common theme was just like, you either are or you aren't an entrepreneur. And I think maybe some people get trapped in like having this idea that they are obsessed with this one thing, right? They want to do this one thing, and that's the one thing that they want to execute on. And as opposed to enjoying business, enjoying the game of business, enjoying the process of building businesses, and being flexible in where that energy is put, leaves you a lot more, in a sustainable spot, I guess you could say, to kind of move with the economy, move with the market, pivot in different scenarios, as opposed to not being business oriented but wanting to accomplish this one thing. Like, say you wanted to own a coffee shop because you're passionate about coffee, not about business, and then get yourself in a situation where you can't pivot in case things change, people grow, all the things. So I feel like that's been really clear to me over the last couple of years, where I was like, okay, I'm really passionate about interior design specifically. And although that's true, just like you are passionate about t-shirts specifically, I think the larger passion that I've really realized is truly about, you know, the art of business building, the art of being an entrepreneur, the art of being solution oriented instead of pointing out problems. And that's the thing that like is really starting to bring me more joy than like a specific outcome. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you know, whatever comes in the future, regardless of whether Airbnb collapses or not, I'm excited because I'm like, okay, there's just an infinite amount of businesses that you could dive into. There's an infinite amount of opportunity, and once you have that mindset, that it feels like it shifts everything.
Yeah, I think to tie this up with a little bow, to just get have patience with yourself while you're building a business. I think that people expect all of it to be built year one, and that's just not reality. Do you think that like Jeff Bezos built Amazon to what it is in year one? Absolutely not. And your business is constantly going to be evolving. So you have to be flexible and patient with yourself while you're going through that process, because it can be frustrating at times when you're not exactly at the place that you want to be, but you just have to like kind of think big picture.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And my pretty little bow, I guess my final thought on this before we wrap up here is the one thing that I think that you and I have done really well in the interim is always leading with value. I think that that's the reason why a lot of opportunities have crossed our plate and we've been able to, you know, jump in the way that we've needed to jump to get ourselves closer to whatever that 5 year, 10 year, 15 year goal is because constantly we're figuring out ways to add value in other people's lives. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, I want those people on board. I want to see if I can work with those people. I want to see if I can bring an opportunity to those people's table. And so for you and I, it's like we haven't had to go really in-depth searching for that opportunity. All of the opportunities like Superhost Labs or like starting the mentorship or, you know, like finding partners to invest with, all of those have come to us because we've been so value first focused and figuring out ways to, you know, add value into other people's lives. And in turn, they're like, wait a minute, those are the people that we want to kind of bring along the way and maybe show them a cheat code or two on how to make even more money than they were anticipating. So um, if you can think about that at the beginning of your journey and not be so focused on your 15-year goal day one, but day one being focused on how do I add value to other people that could possibly add value to me, that's where the magic is, at least in our experience. So
Definitely.
there's our pretty little bow.
Amazing.
Well, thanks guys for joining us on this little tangent. Emily and I have some exciting things that are coming down the pipeline for you guys. So if you've been following us on social media here lately, you will see more of that coming for you. We are looking at ways that we get to connect with you even further. So definitely plug in. We are here to start expanding our community a little bit more. So any final thoughts, Em, before we wrap up?
Just that I hope those little phrases I said at the beginning make sense now after we like went through everything, build a business to build a business and all that. We couldn't really describe it at first, but I feel like we wrapped it all up pretty well. But I'll plug our stuff. If you guys are just listening to us on the podcast here and you're not following us on social media, you can follow us at the KarWells on Instagram and TikTok. We are super active in our DMs on Instagram. So if you guys want to talk to us, please DM us there. And our website is thekarwells.space.
Beautiful. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.
next time. Bye.